members of Academia Europaea, dear colleagues, it's my great pleasure to wish you welcome to the Building Bridges 2022 conference, organized together with the Barcelona Regional Knowledge Hub of Academia Europaea and the Young Academy of Europe. At the time of last year's mainly virtual conference, we thought that we have to mitigate the pandemic, and then the world is again, open, etc. And now, with the Russia war in Ukraine, we are in a more severe situation with all its consequences that threaten the well-being and peace of our societies. But we are here to celebrate excellence in scholarship. The first part of the conference is dedicated to science policy issues. Science policy should enable the development of as beneficial environments as possible for excellence in scholarship to flourish. Thereafter, we will move to the welcoming ceremony of our new members, and this will start after the coffee break at 5, and this ceremony will be started by a 10-minute concert by Barcelona guitarists. And then tomorrow we will enjoy top science. We will have frontier researchers covering humanities, social sciences, and natural sciences. And these speakers have been and will be distinguished with high-profile prizes. Now I give the floor to Professor Ricard Guerrero, who is the outgoing academic director of the Barcelona Regional Knowledge Hub since 2014, when you established the hub, and you have been organizing and being in charge of these annual conferences here in Barcelona for 4 times since 2018. So please, Ricard.
Well, thank you for everybody. Thank you, President, the first woman president in the Academia Europaea, and in all of you. I must confess that we were afraid of not reaching far away the record of all these meetings. It was 2019, because we have 270, which is a record for all this. But my intention was changing the name of this annual conference, in fact, the annual conference of the Academia Europaea. I changed to Building Bridges because I think it was one idea, the change of Professor Andreu Mas-Colell, because it was, I wonder that if you call only annual conference, people don't belong into this. So this year we have about 30 persons that not belong to academia or not being a new member, and so they are, because it's very interesting the thing that you are explaining. And the total number of people now, it was 230. But given the circumstances, it's a very, very good result. And about on 33 countries. So it's I think we can satisfy. Thank you to you. Thank you to your friends. And for trusting again in Barcelona is this nice, incredible place, looking at the sea. And especially for you, it was very, very good weather. Okay? So this is not normal at all. Thank you for coming. Try to, and don't forget to go to the ceremony of the Hypatia Prize that to be held in the center of Barcelona, so in the city council. It will be, I hope, 2 buses from here. You can go directly there. And if somebody don't have an invitation, please, we have people in our staff in the door telling that they can enter, because this is the problem to do this in the city council. There's very restrict control of this. So please enjoy this meeting, and enjoy tomorrow on going to the center to see the city Marja's place in the center of Barcelona. Okay, you have here.
Thank you, Ricard. And now I give the word to Moniek Tromp. She is the chair, the newly elected chair of the Young Academy of Europe since 2 hours. Is this the case?
Thank you very much, Marja. Is it working? Yeah. It's a pleasure to have this welcome, to be part of this welcome of Building Bridges as the first task of the newly elected chair of the Young Academy of Europe. It's a special year for us because we celebrate our 10th anniversary. And this is also then the 10th anniversary of our strategic alliance with Academia Europaea, which is, well, I think mostly reflected in co-organizing and co-hosting this Building Bridges conference. We have been in Barcelona enjoying the nice city for the last few days because we also had our own annual meeting and our elections and etc. So it's nice to be part of this. We have Young Academy members in the room as well, and I'm looking forward to a nice collaborative conference these days.
Thank you. Nisha, please.
Thank you very much.
You go downstairs.
All right, good afternoon and welcome to this first session or a session of the conference in which we will have a series of panel discussions about topics in science policy. My name is Nisha Gained. I am the European Bureau Chief at Nature. I lead our journalistic team in Nature, our journalistic team in Europe. And I'm here to act as a rapporteur. I will be using these debates to inform our journalistic work at Nature. These topics are all things that we regularly write about. So we will have 4 discussions over the next 2 days about science policy, diversity and inclusion, how science benefits society, and lastly tomorrow on the environment. And without further ado, I think I will introduce our first chair. At Nature, we know him as Mr. Open Access. He is Robert Jan Smits, the president of Eindhoven University of Technology and the architect of Plan S. Robert Jan Smits.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. And indeed, the panel will not be complete without Andreu Mas-Colell. It's great to be here and to see so many familiar faces. We are having a panel discussion about science policy for the future. And again, as was already mentioned, Moniek Tromp is representing, she's the chair of the Young Academy, is a professor of material sciences at the University of Groningen, a very prestigious Dutch university. And I think, Andreu, you don't need any introduction with your long career. You're at the moment at the Barcelona Institute of Science and Technology. Now, science policy for the future. I think it's a good topic because I notice, and I think we all notice, that in a lot of European countries, science policy is going through a phase of transition. A lot of governments are rethinking their science policy, and of course that's all to do with the geopolitical situation, the COVID-19 crisis we had, the enormous challenges in the climate transition and energy transition. And what we were going to do today is to discuss between us, do we recognize these drivers of the transition in science policy, and is it indeed only in a few countries we see this, or do we see it across the board in Europe? Now, if I start from my side, I recognize indeed that the science policy is in transition. And I see that very well at European level, but also in the different member states of the European Union. And I see more or less 3 drivers for this transition. I think first of all, the enormous demand for impact. We see everywhere that governments want to know from the science system, what is your impact? What is your impact on the Sustainable Development Goals? What is your impact on the Global South? What is your impact on society, on the economy? That's something I see very clearly coming forward in all countries. And as a matter of fact, many, let's say, member states of the European Union, you see that at the same time, the governments are saying, well, universities, you have by law 3 functions, education, research, but your 3rd function is valorization. What are you doing there? Show me your successes. So I see very clearly that increasingly the governments, the ones who hold the purse, are asking for greater impact from the science system. And you see that also in the instruments which are being deployed. Increasingly, we see missions as being the key instrument for defining, say, science and innovation policies. And of course, the downside of that all is that there may be less interest for frontier research. And that's something which we have to be extremely careful for, that this driver, the demand for greater impact from governments, from society, from the academic system, is leading to less attention for frontier research. Well, I would actually turn it around and say, if you want to have more impact, focus more on frontier research. But I look at Helga, I think you're converted already on that one, and many others here as well. Now, the second driver, which I see across many European countries for the transition in the science, say, policy system, is the enormous focus on knowledge security. Universities are told to have been quite naive, opening all the doors for everyone, and not paying a lot of attention to where the knowledge was going, or to with whom they were cooperating, or who was running around at the universities. And that's, of course, this plea, be less naive, be careful with whom you work. And I see Moniek already nodding, you recognize that from certainly the Netherlands, is of course leading to a situation whereby universities are coping with this request to be less naive, to be a little bit careful who walks around on campus, because that goes so much against the academic culture of openness and cooperation and internationalization. It fits, by the way, very much in the European agenda of technological sovereignty. You all know that the European Commission wants to strengthen Europe's technological sovereignty. Europe should become more autonomous with regards to the supply of technology, be it hardware or software. Very ambitious targets have been set. Europe wants to increase its market share for chip production from 8% now to 20% in 2030. And that means, in that context, doing more at the European level, working more within Europe, but being careful working with third parties. And I won't mention any country in specifically, but you know what country I'm referring to. And then there's a third driver which I see in the science policy system, and that is a profound request from governments, but also from society, for fundamental changes in the academic system. At universities, much more emphasis is to be put on diversity, on gender, inclusivity, but also universities are asked to review the rewards and recognition system. The research assessment exercise is, I think, pretty well known to everyone here in the room, which is heavily debated, and also is, I think, a certain universities already introduced. So I see from my side that indeed in many European countries, but also at European level, the science policy is being in transition, is being rediscussed, redefined. And I think these 3 drivers are, from my point of view, the key drivers. The demands from society and government for more impact from the academic system. Secondly, academic system be a little bit less naive and be much more careful with regard to your knowledge you generate. And last but not least, academic system, change your culture, become much more inclusive, diverse, and make sure that indeed you also look at other metrics for measuring scientific output. So, Moniek, if I mention these drivers, and you've also prepared a couple of slides, do you recognize that, or do you say,
No, definitely. And you will see in the slides, if they appear, then that's, so I will say something about the early and mid-career perspective on that, and mostly about your last point about recognition and rewarding, but I definitely do recognize the other points as well. So,
can we have the slides of Moniek?
Slides?
Is there anyone who could help?
There's someone waving. So.
Yeah. Normally you just shout next slide and then it comes, but it's not working, I think. Well, perhaps.
Well, if necessary, I'm trying to recall how I built it up in the slides. I mean, like you said, so the
there it is. Fantastic.
Yeah.
Good.
And then maybe next slide, because this has been introduced already.
Next one.
No, I have no clicker. Yeah. So you see, the two main points I highlighted here are actually things you have addressed. What I want to start with also is, because we're discussing science policy, but especially in SAPEA, and I think Rudy will be laughing when I say this, I've learned very much to distinguish between science for policy and policy for science. So they're two different things, and I think both are very important in the current climate. Of course, the policy for our own science, that we can do our science, but also the science for policy to advise governments on their policy based on scientific evidence. So you already addressed the changing academic climate. I mean, there's a lot of focus on work pressure, also mental health. I do want to mention that here. You mentioned diversity and inclusion, open science, of course, and since you are apparently the open science man, research assessment, so which is also done in national governments, but also with the European Commission, of course, and career assessment. And that, for me, is broader than just research assessment, because that's the whole recognition and rewarding. So the full career perspective of a scientist in all his or her different roles. And then, of course, finances, if they're good or bad. But like you also addressed, we are currently facing major crises, the war, but also politics, energy, climate, diversity. Well, you can mention quite a few. And I think a lot of governments are doing a lot of crisis management rather than long-term vision. So that is a worry and a point of attention. And of course, if crises appear, you want thorough advice. So this talks about science for policy, but you also want it fast. So how to deal with this dilemma between fast and thorough. And we are discussing this at length also in the science advice mechanism of the European Commission. And like you addressed, so you see it nicely fits with what you mentioned, the fundamentals versus application-based research. And of course, differences, national and EU-wide. So we're setting up research assessment EU-wide, but there are large differences between different nations on how they assess careers and research, etc. So I have just one more.
Next slide. Yeah, I think
this is not working.
Yeah, it's there.
Yeah, okay. So also then, if we talk about next generation policy and if we talk about early and mid-career researchers, of course, it's important to evolve us. I mean, it is their or our future. So increase diversity and inclusion, the recognition and rewarding. And that is very important, especially if you talk about the science policy and policy for science, is that early and mid-career researchers have to think about their career. They are often in precarious situations. And then science policy or policy for science is not necessarily recognized as contributing to their career. So if you want to involve early mid-career researchers, you also have to reward them for it, and that it doesn't stop their academic career. The national differences I addressed, but also open and transparent processes in all of these. And communication and outreach, I think, is at the basis of a lot of this. And actually at the Young Academy of Europe, we had a science communication workshop this week, which was very helpful here as well. So you see it fully fits with your... Yeah.
And we need perhaps to go a bit further now, to bring it home to your university. Rewards and recognition. How in practice are you dealing with it? Because I entered the academic system 3 years ago. And what I find is quite fascinating when I visit universities, your career is still determined by your publications, not by your teaching, not by the knowledge you transfer to industry, not by your science communication, not by scientific support to policymaking. It's still all around publications. And how are you dealing with that now to have this culture change at the university?
Yeah, so I think in the Netherlands and also in Groningen, we are quite far in that, I think. And I mean, a lot of scientists in the Netherlands are worried that we're ahead and they're not at equal playing fields with others. But yes, this whole career path assessment needs to change. And so in the Netherlands, as you know, there are discussions about the different aspects of that. And so if you talk about dealing at our university, then we're actually revising this whole career path assessment track. And all these different aspects now get an equal important role. And actually you can say where your priority is. I mean, we can't be sheep with 5 legs, as we say in Dutch. So you can't do everything at the top level either. But that's with your supervisors, with your department, you actually discuss where you want to focus on. And of course, there's always this pillar of research, but there's also teaching, there's also science advice.
So it means that someone who has a passion at your university for education and can have a career path in education is rewarded for that and recognized.
Yeah.
The downfall, of course, is that that person has, if you are in research, you have the ERC grants, you have the third-tier money from industry. If you go into teaching, the board of the university is probably asking for also income from third parties and for grants. So how does that match then? Will that mean that the requirements from the executive board will be less for the people who are into education? So
so there are different strategies. I think what is being discussed in a lot of Dutch universities is that indeed you choose a path, and the criteria are then also different depending on which path you choose. And I mean, some are natural born teachers, and I think a scientist should be able to teach, but not everyone is educated to be a leader or a communicator or a science policy advisor. So that you're also awarded for whatever you are good at or what you want to develop. But that comes with changing criteria. Otherwise, you can't.
Is there opposition in the university, or is everyone on board?
No, there's always opposition, as you know. I mean, there's similar opposition actually as with PLANET and Open Science. So a lot of people don't I don't know if it's a lot of people. There are people who don't recognize the importance of the change, and they say, well, we've always done it like that, so why should we change? And that is a difficult discussion.
Okay, I switch over to Andreu, and I give you the microphone. I'm going to steal Monique's microphone. I give you yours.
Yes, but before starting in mine, if I may comment.
That was my first question. Do you react some of these trends?
Yes, from our experience here, I think that something that's important is we must modify, jettison, change the vision of a scientific career. A scientific career should not start and end necessarily at the university. What I see is that every little group has a principal investigator and 5 or 6 postdocs. Those 5 or 6 postdocs are not going to become principal investigators. It's purely a statistical matter. And how we think now, we tend to think of they are the ones that will succeed and the ones that will fail. There has to be non-failing, but there are many possible careers in education at the university or teaching high school, which is an extremely important task, or entrepreneurship, etc. All these careers have the career has to stop being looked as a pyramid and look it as a prism, where you enter as a postdoc and you exit in many different ways.
Do you think a lot of attention is paid at the university to tell the people who are on the tenure track, listen, your future or a postdoc lies somewhere else, not at the university? There's often the feeling that these people stay in the hope that they get fixed position.
That's right. So we should find a way to put all the careers at the same level, and not. It's natural from the university to focus on who will become a professor, but we should find a way to talk about the thing that put all these careers at the same level.
Yeah. You've prepared a number of slides as well.
Yes.
Compared to the United States, because you have a lot of experience there.
Yes. One talks. Okay, I will.
You need to think.
I need to. To see. I don't need to think. I need to find out the mechanics of this. How is it? How does it change? No, I just, okay, I need, how does this work?
I think someone who is the expert on this thing.
How does this work, please?
How does this work? Good question. Can someone who knows how this works help out? Because, or else...
Okay, see,
good.
How do I move it on?
I think the easiest... Yeah.
How do I move it on?
So, in principle, you should be doing parsing this
To the right or the left?
But it doesn't.
Doesn't.
Okay, so if the technician could then each time when Andreu says next one, put
No,
on the
but
next
I have 20 slides. I prefer
All right, good.
I prefer that this works.
Okay.
So can anybody tell me how this works?
how this works.
Can you try again? No?
Now something happened. We'll see. Fine. I'm sorry. I have to talk about the interplay between the whole, and then let's say the whole is the European Union, and the regions. But by the regions, I will understand the member states. It's the same if we go to others subunits, and everything I will say will be very general.
The technician is arriving.
Good. Okay, so què és el que tinc que tocar perquè funcioni? Així?
Vale, està en ratolí.
Ok.
Vale, estava en ratón.
És aquest ara?
Izquierda y derecha.
Don't walk away. Let him try first.
Okay, so I will start by comparing the US versus the USA's, two economic areas of similar size. Let me take for granted that the USA has been more dynamic. People my age remember the Lisbon strategy, 2000, when Europe did say that it wanted to compete with the United States and become the most dynamic knowledge-based economy in the world. That was a voluntaristic effort that everybody knew, that most people knew that it would not be accomplished. It was not accomplished, and we are now competing with China for second place. I hope that we can win that competition. A difference for science, a difference between the US versus the EU. I'm sorry, the EU versus the USA is the USA is a large, very integrated economic and cultural space, and that seems to foster innovation-based economic dynamism. So from this point of view, the more integrated, economically more integrated we are in Europe, the better. So, but there is another difference between the EU and the USA, that is the one I will focus, that it's in the USA, it is the funding, the public funding is heavily concentrated at the federal level. It's practically 100%. States in the United States don't have science policy. Here and there is some exception. So let's look at that. So let's say that the US is 100%. In the European Union, the Horizon Europe program, annually, I take divided by 7, represents around 14% of public funding of research in the EU. That is more. There are the intergovernmental agreements. There is CERN, the synchrotron light source, the European Institute in Florence, and years ago it was the same amount, but now must be less. So I speculate that it's around 20%, and I am sorry not to be more precise. But let's say that 20% of public funding in Europe is European-minded from the beginning. I think that one first conclusion is that European countries should aim at increasing substantially the European level effort between 20% and 100%. There is lots of room, should go up. And I think it's desirable that this be done through European institutions, that is to say the European Union, and not simply by intergovernmental agreements. But let's not forget that intergovernmental agreements have produced great science. So let's do it to the European Union, but let's put the same standards to the European Union that the standards of CERN and the MBL and similar institutions. Should we aspire to get all the way to the US model of nearly 100% at the federal level? Answer, no. A secondary reason is that it is not realistic. But the main reason is that this has generated questionable consequence even in the USA. And excellence is highly concentrated institutionally and geographically in the USA. I refer to a splendid book by Gruber and Johnson, Jumpstarting America, for a diagnostic of the problem and analysis of consequences and policy suggestion to overcoming it. They, for example, suggest that the federal government should keep more of the intellectual property of the research it funds and devote the returns of that to geographical diversity in the US. But that's a remark on the NSF. Regional balance is not in its foundational remit. To launch the ERC, for example, took a lot of effort in Europe, but still in the US, the NSF was blocked in Congress for 5 years. And one of the reasons it was blocked, not the only one, but one of the reasons was if it had to have a regional remit or not. And at the end, it won the position that it was excellence only. I think, and I think for good reason, that the American concentration of excellence would not be acceptable in Europe. Excellence is more dispersed in Europe than in the US. I look at the figures, the Nature Index, that it indexes research institutions and universities, and you see very rapidly, if you look at the top 50, there are 18 US institutions, 8 in Europe. It's interesting. Those 8 are the 3 big networks, the CNRS, the Max Planck, and the Helmholtz, and these are geographically neutral. They are spread around. Institutional dispersion is not the same as geographical dispersion, but it's highly correlated. Top 200, 51, 72. Top 500, which is a level of quality. If I were to list institutions, you will see that is an acceptable quality. Europe is 168 and 135. You may ask what are the 5 universities in those top of Europe, and that should induce a sobering thought. Those 5 universities are 3 universities in the UK and 2 universities in Switzerland. 0 in the European Union. So Brexit is a loss for Britain, but it's also a loss for Europe. European policy, dispersion of excellence, a good feature we should maintain. And I will say that the leading challenge for European science policy is how to make compatible the dynamism of the USA research ecosystem with the dispersed excellence characteristic of Europe. And to be colorful, I say that peaks can exist. We should demonstrate that peaks can exist not coming up from sea level, but from a plateau, and we need a plateau, and we need the peaks in the plateau. I should also say that 100% federal funding is not logically contradictory with a policy favorable to dynamism and dispersed excellence. Maybe the US will fix that problem, I don't know, but the USA experience is cautionary, better not to run the risk. And now I'm going to be very concrete and make a simple proposal, which I call a minimal proposal, because if it's better, it's better. I would say that the US should aim to double the budget of the Horizon Europe program, of course, as soon as possible. But I don't want to be Lisbon again and to put dates, but should aim to double. And currently the Horizon program annualized, it's a nice figure, represents with some fuzziness, represents 1 per 1,000 of the European Union gross domestic product. 1 per 1,000, not 1%, 1 per 1,000. So the objective is increase the Horizon Europe program, or however it's called, the next framework program, or the next to the next, to 2 per 1,000. Very easy to understand. 2 per 1,000. And is that feasible? Well, currently spending in R&D is 2.3% of EU 27 GDP. If it was 28, it would be less, because Britain is very successful but doesn't spend so much. The stated policy is 3%, with 1% has to be public. So you do a quick calculation back of the envelope. That means that if we were to get to 3% of R&D spending with 1/3 public, my proposal will amount to say that half of the additional spending, public spending in Europe, should be channeled through the EU channel. I will say that this is not so strange. The European countries have already shown its proclivity to channel research through the federal level. Now it's the third big program: agriculture, cohesion, and then research. I think that's correct. But if you think of it, it is the first, because agriculture, the European Commission doesn't choose if to devote more or less agriculture. From the very beginning, it was transferred. So it has to spend its agricultural budget, because if it doesn't spend it, the states don't have the money. And cohesion is in the nature of a federation. So among sectors, the member states have chosen to channel already a substantial part through the federal lines, which it insists on that. They cannot channel others. They cannot channel defense spending. They cannot channel health, but they have begun to channel research. So let's accelerate the trend. So my proposal is actually very mild. Depending on how we progress towards the 3%, the member states will still administer between 70 and 75% of spending with national logics. Now they spend 80%. So I am not making any radical proposal. A clean idea to implementing the proposal will say the promotion of excellence is assigned to the EU level, and the EU level makes competitive call, ERC style. And the promotion of diversity is assigned to the member states. With their own resources, they foster ecosystems capable to succeed in competitive EU calls. This clean idea is a naive one. This will not completely work, and the reason is that member states are quite unequal in per capita resources. For example, comparable researchers do not get the same pay all across Europe. Until economic convergence obtains, Horizon Europe or similar will have to deal also with the dispersion objective. However, I think that the two objectives at EU level should not be mixed. The standard for excellence at the European level can only be European. The European level, we should not decide that there is a level of excellence for country A and a level of excellence for country B. Excellence should be the same all across Europe. So one budget for excellence and another for dispersion, the two of them not too small. The dispersion budget could be used for helping states in amounts negatively correlated with economic capacity to build up research infrastructure, think ESFRI. To retain and attract talent, they have to be of good European quality, the infrastructure. And the logic is similar to the logic of the structural funds. For example, but it cannot be only infrastructure. The European Union should also play a role in fixing talent, hence in salaries. And here I have run out of ideas. I do not have creative suggestions, but it's a key matter and it deserves thoughts. Perhaps the long practice of fostering networks could provide good ideas for useful tools. So keep thinking. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. An applause, absolutely. You know that in 2024 they start looking for a new European Commissioner for Research.
Well, this is very political.
Hey, one thing which strikes me, you're the only finance minister I've ever come across who talks with passion about science. One of the biggest fights when I was in Brussels, I always had the finance ministers. because they all use the same economic model, the Quest model, or the augmented model, or the Cobb-Douglas model. You know all these things. And if you put therein investment in science innovation, it gives often a negative effect on GDP. Why are you then so passionate, and why are your colleague ministers, your former minister, not convinced? Why?
Well,
Why is this obsession with this?
If let's say, is Philippe Aghion around here? Philippe Aghion is there. So when the finance ministers are trained by Philippe Aghion, then they will put a lot of emphasis on research, because look, the world and Europe, etc., has managed to grow a lot during 300 years, where growth was had something going against it. Population was exploding, and we were comparatively poor. Now population is coming under control, and we are richer and can devote resources to expanding the frontier. And if we want to deal with climate, I refer to Philippe again, we want to deal with climate, etc., we need to put lots of resources into research, and there is not much difference between basic and applied. And otherwise, we will degrowth, and we will degrowth not because the government says now we should degrowth. We will degrowth because the factor will plunge. So we should, and the Chinese understand this. They are spending lots of money in lots of resources in research. So the Chinese understand it. We should understand it too.
Yeah. Are for you these economic models, like the Quest models, they're cast in stone, eh? And if you try to even think about adapting them, economists get very nervous. Why is that?
The models, you mean the economic models? Yeah. Well, I don't know, but I repeat what I have said. I am sure that what I am saying is more of a common currency among young economists. So I think the European Union should hire well.
Should hire well. That's a good message as well. Okay, let's see if there's in the room anyone who would like to intervene or ask a question or statement. I think it's the main issue here is what you're discussing, that the science policy, either at European level or member states, is going through a transition. And Andreu has made a very clear proposal what should happen at European level. I think it's a very clear message, which also affected the national science policy. And we have heard from Moniek also the challenges. I would like to hear some reactions from the audience on that. I see several people raising their hands. So if you could, when you get the microphone, if you could just then introduce yourself. We start with the lady in the back.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Alexandra Badura from Erasmus MC in the Netherlands. I'm the member of the Young Academy of Europe. And thank you for organizing this meeting and giving us an opportunity to participate in it. So first, I have maybe a remark towards the way that we assess the success between EU and US and China. So we use these annexes that show us how successful we are, but they are based on mostly on impact factors that are actually given by companies that have financial incentives in keeping those impact factors. So I see that there's like a little bit of a circle, and I don't really see any way out of it. And I think that one of the things that we tried to do was giving the Plan S, right, and the open access. But then the other question is the open access fees that also have to be funded through some other channels. So I think my general question is, how can we sort of get out of this circle and think of the next generation science policy that is more inclusive, that fosters diversity, that is really future-proof, if we still are stuck with using the metrics that had been developed way in the past, and they are perpetuated again by financial incentives that are outside of the academia.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That's a very good point. I mean, it's a very bizarre situation that the university, the academic world, with all its intelligence, is completely, driven by a metric developed by a private commercial company. The university should be clever enough to develop their own metrics instead of being completely, in the hands of a metric developed by a commercial company. But anyhow, that's the same side. A reaction from your side, Moniek, on what you just mentioned.
Yeah, no, that would be similar to your reaction. I mean, that's the whole process of the research assessment reform, of course. So that was also my question. So how do we define excellence? What does excellence mean? And in these matrices, and if you would do that in a new whatever schema we develop, how would that then balance out between US and EU and maybe other countries? So yeah, I fully agree that we have to kind of see that we move forward and we get to these new whatever. Yeah, I think we want to get away from rankings as well. But I mean, how do you define excellence? I think that's the biggest question.
Andreu, from your side, a reaction?
Well, I don't know if I follow entirely. Just two small remarks on the open access and the fee for open access. Well, that's a place where the European Union, the European Commission, could play a role in helping to fix talent. For example, with negotiations at high level, or with grants, and with the role of metrics with the role of metrics, there are some metrics developed more publicly that they were developed by the European Union in the Netherlands, at Leiden. Yeah. Leiden, and I find those useful supporting material. But basically, I confess, my experience in the United States is that metrics are at most supporting materials, and that each self-respecting institution develops its own methodology and its own judgment, and are not slaves of metrics. And I think that should also be our attitude. My impression is that the generalization of metrics in Europe has been conditioned because public authorities had seen on that an easy resource to control the lower level. But that cannot be the whole story, and that certainly should not be applied to the medium or higher level. Universities should find its own way and form its own opinion. If they want to invest in an area which doesn't get published, invest in an area which doesn't get published. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. I saw someone over there, a gentleman who raised his hands very quickly. Would you still like to come in or not? That's not the case. Yeah, go ahead then. Yep. Yep, yours.
I can step to the side here. Yeah, sorry. Thank you very much for the comments and suggestions. My name is Ken Westfall, and originally I'm from near Chicago, and I mention that because I'm going to say something about the U.S. model for research funding. It's very hard in the U.S. ever to get attention to what should be called the common good. And so much of that funding at the national level has been prompted directly and indirectly by the military. Right? The U.S. military is one of the few branches or administrative units in the USA that actually thinks about the entire USA. And this has been true from before the Second World War. So we've got to be very careful about the U.S. model at that point. The rest of the aims are terrific. And
All right, okay. DARPA indeed. DARPA is playing a key role in the United States. Do you think, Andreu, with the enormous attention now for defense, Germany announced even investments of 100 billion to the defense industry. Do you think it also will lead to an enormous, say, increase in defense research?
If it's a sensible defense policy, it should. I would prefer that the logic of research be independent from the logic of building up an army.
Yeah.
But if one wants to build up an army well these days, you better invest in research.
Yeah. All right. Anyone else on that? Ola, go ahead. Yeah. And then Helga. Yeah, and Helga. Yep, so.
In my view, the biggest problem also from the younger generation is time. I mean, the biggest resource that academics have is time. And one of the biggest problems I see that with the younger generation is the amount of time that is spent on writing and rewriting grant proposals. Grant proposals are often demanded to be completely in excess of what is necessary. I think there's a need for a reform of the funding process, because there has been a tendency over the last 10 years to make the process more and more complex.
Yeah.
And actually, it's confusing for panels. I have experience of that from an ERC panel chair and also in the Medical Research Council. I think we should think carefully about that. Is it a sensible way of spending young people's time on rewriting the same grant proposals again, making tiny changes that actually don't really make any big change, but somehow then finally persuades the committee that now every box is ticked and so on. That, I think, is a very, very big time waster, actually. And this really impacts on a lot of people.
And linked to that, now we have the microphone. You see applause. Ola, how many papers would you ask from someone to be published who is in a tenure track procedure?
Well, I don't think a number of papers is the right measure, quite frankly.
I fully agree, but you see that universities, many still ask 4 or 5 papers, which is of course...
We need to focus on what actually has been shown, what actually has been discovered, what actually can be applied.
Yeah.
And I think that has been lost a little bit.
I fully agree. Moniek, you agree?
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think, so what we see, that, and that's in Europe, but also in the Netherlands, is that this is now also being under discussion, and this research on research is being done. So how if you send in the same proposal 3 times, one time you come out top, the next time you come out bottom with exactly the same proposal. So how does this, what is the effect of the committee? What is the effect of the reviewers? And I think indeed we have to rethink this system, and but therefore this research on research, I think, is very useful and very interesting, because then that might help us guide on how to do this. Might.
Helga, the floor is yours. The microphone over here, yes? Yeah.
Excuse me.
One second. First, Mrs. Novotny, and then I come to you, okay? Helga, go ahead.
I speak little. We are now cooperating with China for second place. Your PPT speaks whether China's development and Europe's development are a relationship of competition or win-win cooperation. Can the relationship between countries and the regions be as macroscopic as the relationship between people, such as you and me? Do we have to choose to compete with each other or to cooperate with each other? The direction and the decision of the choice ultimately decide that we are friends or a competitor. These are two different things. There are two different kinds of thinking and cognition. What are you doing?
Okay, I think a clear statement with regards to cooperation. I think cooperation has to always be based on mutual respect and rules of the game. And if one of the parties is not respecting the rules of the game anymore, or breaking down the multilateral system which we all have set up with IP protection, then the trust breaks down and cooperation breaks down. But Andreu, your reaction to your political question. Sorry, did you have your own microphone?
Well, I think that the polarization of the world is unfortunate, but it's a fact. And in that polarization, there is no doubt in my mind where does Europe belong to, and that has consequences. I would prefer a multilateral world where there will be the United States, there will be Europe, there will be China, I don't know if India, Russia is a weak economy, but it has nuclear weapons. And in this game, Europe will be building bridges, between the US and China. The current moment, for reasons we all know, is not a moment favorable to bridges because of the conflict in Ukraine. Europe needs to emphasize its commitment to NATO, and it needs to emphasize that we belong to the traditional Western world. And that's that. But the objective should be a multilateral world, and then our role will be build bridges.
Europe's agenda on technological sovereignty was not invented in Brussels. It was the consequence of a development in the world whereby the multilateral system of cooperation and respect was being broken down. That led to the European agenda. And I think, like Andreu said, in an ideal world, we go back to the multilateral system with respect, with cooperation, with respect of IP rules, cooperation based on win-win. That's ideal, but unfortunately, we are not there yet. And I wonder whether we're going to be there in the years to come. Helga, now finally the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you. I would like to build a bridge between what you said about impact and what Andreu said about investment in the future. Impact is a concept that has a past dependency. I fully agree this is one of the drivers, but we should remind ourselves where it comes from. And it comes from the intrusion of public management already a decade or longer ago that took over the university and the research system. And the way how impact is defined is the sort of immediate impact. So this is why, for instance, fundamental research has an enormous problem to show its impact, because we know sometimes it can take 15, 20 years or even longer to have the impact, but we know about the usefulness of useless knowledge. This we know. And I think the shift that Andreu was advocating towards investment would open a new space for us, including the young generation, because it is an investment in the future, and we have to rethink the future anew. The future in the past seemed clear. Now, you know, with all these developments and crises that we have, the future has become much more confused. It always is uncertain, but now, you know, we feel the uncertainty of the future in many more dimensions than we did before. And it opens a new space for young people also to divert from this sort of linear career thinking. And it has to start very early. There are many different opportunities, but it should be attached to rethinking the future and investing into a future that we have to rethink collectively. Thank you.
Thank you, Helga. Ricard, from your side.
Well, thank you. We can talk about experience in several American universities and only 2 universities in Spain. And I can compare. It's not only a question of money. It's a question of organization. So one thing that is very important to convince people in Europe that university and research are now linked. So, indeed, there are several institutes without really institute of research with independent, but university must be a research center too. And the second is about how to guarantee some career for young people, because if not, we are losing the best people for the private other things, and we need to maintain, in spite of the fact that the salaries cannot be comparable, to maintain good promises and good opportunities for young people to keep the best at the university.
So I think it's a good statement. And Moniek, when you talk to your colleagues at the Young Academy, Europe-wide, do they all have good perspectives? I know our own country, the Netherlands, I think the perspectives are pretty good. In other countries, what do you hear from your colleagues?
No, I mean, this is very different, and so from all kinds of perspectives, from precarity, so permanent versus part-time contracts, from teaching roles versus research roles, from getting access to research funding, to infrastructure, to so this is very, very diverse, and I think that's why this whole European research assessment change is so difficult, because we're not talking from the same level playing field. That's how you say it, I think. So that, that makes it very complex. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Andreu, and then
on the issue of impact, I think we should not accept the premise. There is no research which doesn't have impact, and it's research that has impact. Maybe what we should do is to appropriate the term. These days, it is truly obvious that basic research in biomedicine is very important. The story of the vaccines is a perfect example, and I think it is also perfectly accepted that if we want quantum computers or quantum communications, which is getting lots of funding, nobody in its right mind will think that this does not include basic research in quantum mechanics. Let's appropriate the word and let's all make impact research.
Points. Okay, let's. I think
just one word.
No, we have time for. Yeah, I come to you in a second. I think that the most important thing is impact. If they ask me for my university, what is your biggest impact on society? These are these brilliant graduates every year, which go into our society. That is the impact number one.
Yes.
That's the impact number one. Floor is yours.
I just wanted to have there will be big pressure to reduce budgets on research, because, there will be huge pressure to say we have to reduce our debt because interest rates are on the rise, and we should cut on those things. There will be enormous pressure in various countries. And I think it's very important. I call that the Draghi doctrine. I know Mario Draghi is no longer prime minister, but there is something he understood very well. We had this 3%, criterion of Maastricht. I think it's a very bad criterion because it put all kinds of spending on the same footing. One cannot put on the same footing research spending, investing in innovation, investing in energy transition, and kind of recurrent spending. You see what I mean? So I think it's very important that we reform our state, we make state spending more efficient, that we reform our pension system adequately, but that we don't cut on research and long-term growth-enhancing investment. I think there will be enormous pressure to do it. And I think instead of saying the total amount of spending, we should look at the composition of spending and the governance of the spending. Well-governed universities, look at performance but I think that will be important. And one word on Europe versus US. You mentioned the defense. The US is a whole chain. They invest a lot in basic research. NSF, NIH, the HHMI. Very interesting. We don't have the equivalent of the Howard Hughes Medical Investigator in Europe, which is private donors also to finance long-term research, risky research. So they have a lot. They give a lot to basic research. But they have the DARPA, the Defense Advanced Project Research Agency, and the equivalent in bio, which was the BARDA. And as you know, without the BARDA, we would not be here today, because it's the BARDA that really pushed turning RNA messenger, basic research into mass production of vaccine in 1 year. And they have the whole ecosystem. And in Europe, we don't have the equivalent of the DARPA. We don't. We just simply don't. And we need not only to push basic research and much more, but to also set up the equivalent of that. And last word, very stupid to exclude UK from Horizon. I know we wanted to punish the Brits, and we punish ourselves by doing that. They are the best to exclude UK and Switzerland from ERC or from Horizon or things like that, because we want to make sure that other countries will not want to Brexit as well. I think it's a very short-sighted strategy.
Yeah. Now, on your first point, preserve when there will be budget cuts necessary. There will be budget cuts necessary. Preserve the long-term investment in education and science. I come back to my first point with regard to the finance ministers. They hold the purse. They need to be convinced that these investments are good investments for Europe as a whole and for the younger generation. And I think it's an enormous responsibility on economists and the finance ministers to really sort out their economic models and to really look into, indeed, and step away from knowing the costs of everything but the value of little. See it. And then I think, gradually are wrapping up unless someone is jumping on the chair to ask for the floor. See it.
Yeah, I think it's a very timely discussion. I'd like to come back to this issue raised by Andreu. I strongly agree with your vision in terms of going up from the 20% to 30%. But there's also the remaining part, whether it's 70 or 80, on the national level. And I would like to hear the view of the panel about the chances to optimize the coordination of this 80, or in the future maybe 70%, because that's a big chunk of money.
Yeah, and that's called in Brussels jargon joint programming, because Brussels only has, as Andreu said, a small part of the budget for research in Europe, mostly at national level. And there was a plea, therefore, from the European Commission to member states on specific topics, à la carte, do joint programming, organize joint programs between 3 or 4 countries on Alzheimer, on climate change, in order to also there have scale and scope. So it's something which turned out to be extremely complex in order to put it into practice, but that was indeed the idea, next to the central EU budget, to ask member states to do joint programming, to create joint programs in specific areas, purely at a voluntary basis, but not easy to realize that. I saw someone sitting over there, 2 persons, and then we really wrap up.
Yes, okay. So this is a senior thing from Max Planck in Germany. So my question is to discuss about the excellence and the high quality. I think from the previous discussion that we are happy in Europe to have high quality, but not too much in the excellence. But my question is, how do we differentiate the excellence in fundamental research or in the applied research? And I think somehow from the ranking, from all these metrics, we are very good, even Max Planck, as society and director there, we are very good in the fundamental research in terms of excellence. But the definition of applied research or innovation-driven research, I feel that Europe is not as strong enough or far from strong enough if I compare with the US or even nowadays in China or Korea. So how do we improve here?
Yeah. Okay, let's first get 2 more and then we really stop. I get them. Yes, you've been...
Thank you. My name is John Tolan. I'm at the University of Nantes, and as an American who's been living in Europe for about the past 30 years, I was surprised by when you say the U.S. funds almost 100% federally. In fact, it's much more diverse. The states indeed fund research through the state universities. As Ricard mentioned, there are no federal universities. There are state universities that are important research institutes. And then, of course, there are private universities, some of which have substantial endowments to pay for research. And also, and one of the big differences between the US and where I live now in France is the private money in research, foundations, corporations, and so forth. And as someone who has unsuccessfully in France tried to get private and corporate funding for research institutions and humanities and social sciences, that's a big cultural difference. So the question is, and there are definitely 2 sides of this debate, do we also want to encourage more corporate, more private funding of research, or do we want to stick with a model that's government-driven?
All right, I think Andreu has to reply to it, but there's one gentleman there because he has been asking already for 10 minutes of floor, but he's very polite. He always waited
very
politely.
quickly. So my name is Arkadiusz Marciniak. I'm at Mickiewicz University in Poznań, Poland, and I would like to comment on this widening gap between old and new EU states in relation to funding. And we have been seeing this very interesting by Paul Holmes earlier today, statistics about ERC success of the old and new EU countries, and there's a really huge gap between the old Europe and so-called the new Euro countries. And of course, ERC is just excellence only criterion. So obviously the countries of Central Eastern Europe are not excellent enough to be able to get funding. But then the question is for the science policymakers of how we could actually change the situation. And it is both from the Brussels side and also from the national government side, because otherwise the Europeans from East and Southeast will be increasingly feel excluded from this European family. And I believe that Europe as an entity would be much stronger if somehow countries of that part of Europe will be more included into this, the common objectives and be more successful at the European level. Thank you. How would you want to comment on that?
I think it's a good question. I think everyone wants that all 27 member states are part of the research family. But I think it would be foolish to change criteria for that purpose. The criteria of excellence, which are used by the European Research Council, have to be maintained. But there are other instruments to build up capacity. There are in the structural funds something like 60 billion available to allow notably the countries you mentioned to build up research system, to modernize universities, to buy equipment, to train young people. So the capacity building is essential through the structural funds. And besides that, and there's excellent work which Eva Kondrossi and Siet Voetling have been doing in the ERC to make sure that you find innovative ways to include people in consortium projects, not by lowering criteria, but for instance, but Eva gives you the floor, you know how to do it. Yeah.
Just coming back to this last remark concerning Poland. There is a new initiative. It started already, I think, 3 years ago, and this is by the Ministry of Science, who decided to make a change at the university system. This is excellence initiative and making research universities. There were some universities which were only concentrated on teaching programs, and these universities could not reach that level, which would be significant at European level. So what they did, actually, they selected the 20 so-called best universities, and they gave them the chance to really develop excellence. So they gave to the best 10 universities 10% of their annual budget, and they can use it as they want to develop the excellence. And one can see already the change. So there are every year an evaluation, there is an international committee, and we can see also the other 10 universities which can get only 3%, but they could identify what are the strengths of the university, where they can have their niche at the European or international level. They became much more multidisciplinary, so there is no silos among the different disciplines, and this made really a change. And we can see now that even they were successful at ERC application, there is not enough time yet to make really a big change, but something started. And I think it's a good way, and it would be very good if other new countries, EU-13 countries, would have similar initiatives. Yeah. And really this depends on the potential of the people. They could get also international staff members. So this is something which started in Poland, and I hope that maybe other countries will continue on the same way, and this can somehow help to have a better success and less gap between the countries.
I think it's a good point. Reforms are necessary in order to boost, to create an excellent system. Andreu.
Yes, I wanted to say 3 things. One, the logic of the structural funds. I think the structural funds could be much more oriented towards research, although they already cover research infrastructure. That's one. Second, picking up from what has been said now, one could think of things like an excellence initiative at European level, where the concrete financing of the designated universities would be in reverse proportion to the per capita income of each country. So in the less developed countries will be mostly financed by the European Union. In the most developed will be mostly financed nationally. And the third is very embarrassing. I remind you that I am an economic theorist of a qualitative nature. So I have told you, remember 1 per thousand, 2 per thousand. No, it's 10 per thousand and 20 per thousand. I apologize. The basic proposal is still the same, double the Horizon program, but then my calculation fall at zero. So I apologize.
Well, I think after that, we will bring this to an end. We already be messing up completely the program by 10 minutes over time. So I hope that the next panel will not be too upset with us. Thanks very much, Andreu. Thanks very much, Moniek, for a lively panel. And of course, thank you very much to the audience.
Okay, thank you very much for that robust discussion. We will move swiftly to our second discussion now towards an inclusive and representative academic landscape. And I will introduce the chair, Dr. Lynn Lappert, who is a professor in computational chemical physics, at the University of Twente. Dr. Lappert.
Okay, so it's a pleasure to be here and to be hosting this session. Can I ask my panelists to come up to the stage? I see all three of them. Please take a seat. Oh, we actually have 4 chairs. That's excellent. So while you're taking your seat, I'm going to introduce the session for a moment. Thank you for the introduction. So yes, as it says on the slide, my name is Lynn Lappert. I should actually stand at the microphone, right? I know, I should not be wandering around. A bit nervous here. Okay, so the premise of this session is actually quite simple, I think. It is clear that researchers and educators, that is the people whose primary task it is to perform that impactful and innovative research that we have been sketched out in the previous panel discussion, and to teach future generations of researchers, entrepreneurs, decision and policymakers. Those people should represent the diversity of society in every respect. And we are talking here really about demographic, geographic, and ethnographic diversity. And that is true for universities and research institutions across Europe. The current limited diversity implies that we, all of us here in this room and at European research institutions, are not doing enough to make sure that we are attracting and recognizing and retaining large numbers of talented people, and are thus missing out on significant scientific and societal potential. Also, this problem is, of course, self-propelling, because if we are not recognizing talent, then we are also feeding this problem forward to future generations through the education and visibility of role models that we provide or fail to provide to our students. So I'm very happy to discuss this topic with this panel of experts here. And the goal of all of this is really for everyone in this room, I hope, to take home at least one idea on a structural level on what to change at your own institution and what kind of ideas to bring to your own institutions to enact this change in the future. So let me start by introducing the panel members. we have here on the left-hand side, Stephen Curry. Stephen is a professor of structural biology at Imperial College London, and he's also, since 2017, the first assistant provost of equality, diversity, and inclusion of that institution. He is also the chair of the Declaration on Research Assessment, DORA, and this is really just one of the many examples for his interest and active engagement in the areas of science policy, research evaluation, and equality, diversity, and inclusion. Then in the middle, we have Yvonne Galligan. She is director of equality, diversity, and inclusion, and a professor of comparative politics at the Technological University, Dublin. Yvonne has actually more than 100 publications on gender equality, both of a scholarly nature, but as well as reports for governmental and non-governmental international organizations. She is a leading figure of a broad range of activities centered around gender equality. And to mention just one of them, she was the founding director of the Centre of Advancement of Women in Politics at Queen's University, Belfast. And then the third panel member is Katalin Csolimoschi. She is an assistant professor of plant biology at Eötvös-Loránd University in Budapest. She is now one of our newly elected co-vice chairs of the Young Academy of Europe, and also the co-chair and the founding member of the Hungarian Young Academy, as well as a co-chair of the Danube Region Thematic Mission of the Academia Europaea Budapest Knowledge Hub. She is strongly engaged in a lot of topics centered around science policy with the focus on equality, diversity, inclusion, science outreach, and the mission of widening participation to EU 13 countries. So we are going to start with a short 3 to 5 minute presentation of each of the panelists. Then we will have a discussion of, I think, about 30 minutes. I don't know whether we still have enough time for all of the plans that I had. But I hope we will also have 10 minutes in the end for questions from the audience in the end. So I would ask, and let's see now whether this works. I have everything on my own computer for the guys over there. Okay. So maybe we can switch now to my computer, and I would ask Yvonne to come up for the first. I think it's easiest if you just stand here. I know it's going to be a bit of a shuffling around, but it should be coming up for you. There you go. Good. Great.
Okay, thank you very much, Lynn, and thank you very much to the Young Academy for the invitation to be with you today. Just to add to my biography that Lynn has so nicely presented, I would just like to say, in addition, that my pronouns are she, her. So I am going to speak very briefly on the subject of this panel, which is towards an inclusive and representative academic landscape. And I'm trying to get a kind of a big picture framework for us to consider that question. But first, I want to give you a very quick snapshot of the university that I come from. It is a technological university. It is very new. It is only 3 years old, but it is a coming together of 3 different technological colleges in the Dublin area to create the first technological university in Ireland, TU Dublin. And that's a very quick snapshot of our main metrics. So I'm going to talk about 3 particular questions and issues today. And I believe that if we are going to understand if we're going to understand equality in our universities, we have to understand why we have inequality and why that inequality persists. So we have to understand the underlying dynamics of inequality, because our universities are microcosms of our societies, as we all know. And as universities, we are sites of knowledge creation and we're sites of knowledge sharing. The last panel just just completed described that really perfectly with the passion that people gave to the subject of research and excellence in research. And that's what we do. We teach and we research. We create knowledge and we impart knowledge. And so therefore, it is part of our responsibility to critically examine societal assumptions and practices regarding inclusion so that we, in our institutions and among our students, our next generation of leaders, we can develop better responses to the inequalities that continue to exist in our wider societies today. The second point that I want to make is that when we do identify these inequities in our institutions or elsewhere, we should not expect the group that is suffering that inequity to change or to fit in order to fit into the structures, the practices, the norms and the attitudes that we have residing in our own universities today. It is not unfair to ask somebody to bend themselves out of shape in order to fit into a system that they don't fit into right now. There is certainly plenty of room for networks of underrepresented groups, be they based on gender, be they based on race or ethnicity, be they based on sexual identity, be they based on any other criteria. These networks have a very important role of crystallizing the interests and the agendas of those underrepresented groups, crystallizing their priorities and trying to shape the institutional discussion to incorporate their priorities. So the work, though, of changing needs to rest with the dominant group or groups. And that means that it must rest with those who make decisions in the university, be they men, be they white people, be they abled persons, be they middle-class people. So we can't just allow underrepresented groups to carry the burden of fixing their own exclusions. And the third point that I would like to make is that that change comes about more quickly if there are smart plans in place. If these plans are clear, they're transparent, and they have clear actions, defined actions accompanying them. For these plans to be in place, it needs full commitment at all levels of the university, implementation at all levels, and importantly, accountability at all levels for the achievement of these outcomes. So in conclusion, I will say that the path to an inclusive and representative academia rests with us tackling these questions of inclusion and exclusion and enabling our universities to be not just knowledge generators and creators, but also role models for our societies. So I leave my points there and we allow the next person to speak.
Thank you very much. Katalin, can I ask you to be next? To switch back to the laptop, please. Yes.
Thank you very much, and I really feel honored to be here and to speak on behalf of Young Academy of Europe, but of course also as a representative from an EU 13 country, so from Hungary. As we are all scientists, I thought that in order to introduce the problem, maybe it's good to show some data, as we would like to base decisions on evidence. So with the Hungarian Young Academy, we have just we have performed a survey in 2021, and we have just released a long report, detailed report on it today. So in this report, we have discussed in detail and analyzed many aspects of the career path of early career researchers. And in one of them, the aspect I would like to outline here is a kind of diversity or the lack of it. So rather, I would say I will talk a little bit about inequalities which exist and which we were, I think, our survey was unique to clearly show that we have a very strong gender wage gap in Hungary between women and men working in the same position, or having in the same scientific field, or having even the same amount of grants, funding, or publication record. Even if we normalized the data and checked it really thoroughly, we found that even in that case, there are quite important differences in the wages of men and women. And to bring another aspect of inequality, what we were quite surprised to see, but we found, and our data clearly show, that there is also statistically significant difference between researchers working in the central region, so in the capital, Budapest, and those located in the countryside. We don't really understand yet the reasons of this difference. Maybe housing is less expensive in that regions, but for sure, again, in that case, we have normalized, we have checked if we are comparing people in the same position and working in the same field. But although, even after these comparisons, we found significant inequalities in this respect. So these large differences, it's hard to explain them and hard to understand them, but what we think for Hungary, I would say they are probably based and related to the traditional family model, which is very strong, and that might explain the difference. And especially, as you can see on the graph, that the difference is largest in the 30s, when women probably have children. But we have also normalized to that effect, and we have also checked whether childless women and childless men had significantly different income. And yes, they have differences, but these differences increase with the number of children. So that's really an inequality which is not just based on the family status or on childcare activities and the differences of sharing those among men and women in a country with more traditional family model, but it's also somehow related to gender bias. So we had another opportunity which is quite unique. I think that we have a Hungarian database for publications, and we asked the respondents of the survey to provide a link to their publication records so that we could analyze how their personal details and their publication records could be fitted. So we did it, of course, considering GDPR issues and in a very safe manner, because these are really highly sensitive data. But we are really happy that we have a representative number of respondents who agreed to share with us also these data. And while talking about research assessment and evaluation of excellence and why and maybe the inequalities of women and their representation in leading position, it might be interesting to see that there are large differences also in the number of publications. Again, it might not sound so much surprising that women in their 30s are publishing less. Well, probably that's also related. This is clearly related to having children and staying at home. But at the age of above 40, this gap in the publication between women and men disappeared. So that means that this was rather a kind of period in which women can publish less. But surprisingly, we have also checked the citations, and we have normalized these data we have taken into consideration the differences among the different domains and the different scientific areas. And also we have checked the number of Q1 papers published in international journals. But those differences, they exist in the publication and also in citation. So that's well, we have summarized it like saying that women who haven't published their papers in their 30s will not get citations, even if they publish more after, or they publish the same number of papers like men after 40 years of age. They don't get the citations for those papers that they haven't published in that kind of sensitive period when they were probably more occupied with some caring responsibilities. So, as I mentioned, this is probably related to the traditional family model, which is strong in Hungary, and I also think maybe in EU 13 countries. So after these data from Hungary, and after having seen the gender and regional wage gap and wage inequalities in Hungary, let's switch to the European level. I'm sure you all know or have seen these data several times, so I'm not sure how much it's clear to see them, but EU 13 countries are basically located in this part of the graph. So in most post-socialistic countries, the publication, the representation of women in academia is relatively high. It's almost 5% or equal representation. I would not say it's because these countries are pioneers in gender equality. Maybe, if you allow me, maybe I would say it might be associated to the low income. So an assistant professor in Hungary has 600 euros net income in a month. So it's not so much attractive for men. So either they leave the country or they leave academia into industry to get higher salaries. So maybe that's one of the reasons. And another maybe more positive thing, when especially in comparison with Western European countries, that in Hungary, for instance, we had a relatively high number of non-precarious, so tenured positions. So it was more safe place for women to have children because precarity was not so strong, and the pressure and stress was smaller in our region. So maybe that also favored women to stay in academia and trying to thrive. There are two outliners. If you have a look at the graph, I indicated the Czech Republic and Hungary, which have very low number of female researchers. And well, I'm wondering why, because you see they are in line with the most research competitive and research and highly funded and very strong countries at the level of scientific output and scientific financing. So they are, in my opinion, again, there might be probably several reasons for the difference, but one thing I don't think many people have ever mentioned is that the Czech Republic and the Hungary are the two countries in the world, at least according to my knowledge, we have the longest childcare leave, parental leave. So in Czech Republic, you can stay up to 4 years per child at home as a woman, and or maybe also as a man, and in Hungary it's 3 years. So that's an issue that it's well, of course, it's a personal choice and decision. It might have positive sides, but that might also be difficulty for women to come back to research after all this long maternal leave. And this is the moment when women who are underpaid and also are less successful, because I mean they haven't published, their citation level is lower than those of men, might leave academia. And I don't want to discuss the exact numbers for Hungary, but we all know that there is a scissoring effect and the number of women is decreasing with the position in academia. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, can I ask Stephen? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lynn. So, Robert Jan, for the record, I am annoyed that you ran over by 10 minutes. So I think you owe us all a drink tonight at whatever event is happening. However, I am pleased that you mentioned research culture, in particular EDI and research assessment, as one of the drivers of the transition in science policy that you discussed. So we're still friends. So Yvonne is very much the expert on this panel. I am a lowly practitioner, and my remit really was to tell you a little bit about the work that we are doing at Imperial College in London on trying to address issues of EDI. So very briefly, I'm the assistant provost for EDI. I'm the first holder of that role. And this is a position that's becoming more and more common, certainly in universities in the UK, and I think around Europe as well. And I'm involved in European networks addressing this issue. So my practical steps, my recommendation for anyone in a university leadership is to basically be strategic, make the case. At Imperial, we very much believe that attention to this issue is essential for our future success as a university. Okay, we want to tap into pools of talent that we know by looking at the numbers that we have been neglecting, whether they be women or people from ethnic minorities. We very much see diversity as a strength, and we very much see that as a route to increasing the quality, the relevance, and the world-changing impact of our research. We very much see ourselves as an international university. We are there not just to serve the British society, but to serve the world. We look to try and solve global challenges, but we don't know what the global challenges are going to be unless we are representative of that population. And internally, of course, having a culture that pays attention to this actually lifts all boat and benefits all members of staff. So you have to be systemic. So one of the first things I did was to write a strategy. The strategy has an action plan associated with it. I'm not sure it was quite as smart as the one that Yvonne would recommend, but I have got better at it over the years. And so this is very much about seeing EDI as a shared responsibility. So, you know, the commitments we have undertaken, and we are on a journey. We're by no means perfect as a university, far from it. But it's about, you know, the top one is about integrating EDI into all management processes. This has to be a shared responsibility. And there are 7 other sort of elements to our program, which we see as important. The document on the bottom right is a sort of a LERU document. Ironically, perhaps, a highly exclusive organization has produced, I would like venture to suggest, a very interesting document, how you take an integrated approach to equality through your university. So ultimately, I wrote the strategy. Who's responsible for delivering it? I, of course, tried very hard to make sure that it wasn't me. Okay, it's not me, and it's not some EDI committee that is set up by the provost or the vice chancellor, everyone. And so our vision is that every student, every member of staff has a role to play in this. We do have a process of formal oversight, and it's really important that the senior leadership is involved, is seen, and is actually actively involved in helping to deliver on those activities. What do you need to do? Well, lots of different things. I'm afraid there are no silver bullets on offer. The world is very complex. It's very messy. The challenges that we are trying to address are not just institutional. Of course, they are societal. But there are many different dimensions to the action. So things that we have looked at are the issue of sexual harassment, for example, our whole research culture. We looked at our conference policy about making sure that one has a diverse panel, good gender balance, et cetera, et cetera. Reverse mentoring is a scheme that we've introduced to try and give our very white and very male senior leadership team first-hand testimony and experiences and interactions with people whose lived experience is massively different from their own. And that then helps them to bring that intelligence to their decision making. You have to think about how you provide toilets to people on the campus, and you have to look at your history. Imperial has a history that is deeply linked with British colonialism, and if you read last week's Nature, you will read a little bit more about our efforts to address that. But that it's 100 or more years old. It has an impact today on members of our community. Talking about action plans, one specific thing, we'll get into the details perhaps in the Q&A. We use the Athena Swan scheme particularly to look at issues around gender equality. Athena Swan as a system has its critics. It has been reformed usefully in the last 2 or 3 years, and I think it is actually, to be frank, much more robust than the gender equality plans that are now required for European funding, which as far as I can tell right now are pieces of paper. So Athena Swan is more rigorous. It requires you to have a deep look at your data and to talk to your staff and listen to their experiences, to survey their experience of the institution, to identify, therefore, your main priority issues, and then to develop an action plan which will then hopefully drive things in the right direction. This is just a summary of progress that we have made at Imperial over the last 5 years, partly as a result of our engagement and our use of the Athena Swan mechanism. So the blue is 2016 and the pink is 2021. And so we are moving in the right direction, arguably not as fast as we should be on some fronts. And if you look at the bottom, our percentage of female professors is still pretty abysmal at less than 20%. The action plan that we just committed to, because we've just renewed our Athena Swan award. Again, I won't go through the details of this. I'm very happy to share the slides with the organizer if people want to follow the links, but you can find all this on our website. But the key things about the plan, I was very glad that Yvonne mentioned this, is that it has to be smart, okay? So you have clearly defined goals, you need measurable targets, and you need clearly defined action owners. And again, when I wrote and negotiated the action plan, I made sure that most of the actions did not fall to me. They fall to the people responsible for those core activities within the university, whether they are heads of department, faculty deans, HR professionals, educators, whoever. You need defined outcomes and timelines, and we have a delivery deadline of 2027 on all of these, and you need regular and senior oversight, and we do have that. The provost of our university is responsible for making sure that we deliver on this. So with that, I will be quiet, and we will get into the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, actually, I want you to be quiet for now, because I would like to address my first question to you, Stephen, after this very interesting discussion of the actions that you have implemented at Imperial. I mean, you mentioned that measurable outputs are important. On the other hand, you said, okay, there are no silver bullets, and I can also imagine that some of the measures that you have implemented over the last years are going to take time until you actually can see the outcome and the efficiency of these measures. But in your own, if you reflect back on the past couple of years, what would you say have been the most effective measures, the ones with the most teeth, let's say?
Well, so engaging with these external charters is itself a powerful mechanism, because you are holding yourself externally to account. It also helps to create deadlines. If you're just doing this internally, even with the best will in the world, you would often kick things down the road 6 months, a year, or whatever. We haven't got time for this. In terms of specific measures, I think actions around recruitment is one of the key efforts that we have been making. It has been implemented well in some departments, but our work now is to try and implement it consistently across the university. And that is a policy we call Know Your Pool. I think many people will be familiar with the kind of approach, but it's about being proactive and going out to encourage the talented women in the pool that you hope to recruit from to apply to your university. And often we'll use networks within the department to identify candidates. In best cases, actually the head of department encourages them to apply. They still have to meet the standards of the university. There's no compromise on that. We don't see any need to, whatever. The talent is absolutely there. And then we look at how effectively that has worked when it comes to looking at the gender balance with regard to applications, and then shortlisting as well. And it's important that the recruiting panels are themselves diversified, and so you must have women on panels that are recruiting women, for example. Our chemical engineering department has been very good at this. The whole interview process takes place within one day and within core hours, so between 10 and 4 o'clock. There's no boozy dinner the night before with the candidates, which would necessarily bias against people who have small children or caring responsibilities. And also the interviewing process is very much re-engineered as non-adversarial, and it's about exploring with them what the candidate can bring to the department in terms of their contributions across the board, not just the quality of their research, but what are their qualities as a teacher and a mentor, as an educator, and in terms of departmental citizenship. So one has to look across the profile. So that is one of the measures that we think, and certainly we see from the data in particular departments that have done it well, it has produced results. But the challenges do vary. I mean, life sciences, which is my home department, we don't have an issue recruiting students, but my goodness, we have an issue making sure that junior staff get all the way to professor. Mm-hmm. Engineering, physics, computing, still very male-dominated, even at the level of schooling, and so there are other interventions there that need attention.
Mm. for sure, the data that you have shown in your slides indicates that you have had some success increasing these numbers. And I remember from our pre-panel discussion, you mentioned specifically the importance of data availability in the first place. I guess that doesn't only go for recruitment numbers, but also for other things. Can you say a little bit more about this?
Yes, I mean, I whizzed through the slides, but the data requirements for Athena-Swan are intensive. So there's an appendix attached to our application, which is 150 pages long or thereabouts. So you look at who works there now in terms of gender ratio. When you're recruiting, who applies, who gets shortlisted, who gets the job. When you're promoting, we also look at grievances and disciplinary, who makes complaints and how are they resolved. And then for students as well, we look at admissions and who we make offers to and who gets in. And also then we look at how well they do. Do they graduate with a first class and upper second class? Is there an awarding gap of any sort that would indicate bias in our assessment processes? Mm-hmm. So it's hard work. And we also do it for race as well now, and it is tremendously hard work. It's a lot of effort, and I have now done it, having been in the post for 5 years, but I never at any point felt that they were asking us the wrong questions. And in some cases, for the first time, we looked at data that we simply should have looked at long before and identified gaps. Particularly, there are some ethnic groups where we have massively under-recruited. It's nowhere near representative of the UK population, never mind the London population, which is where we are based.
Yeah. Yvonne, can I ask you to comment on this? I mean, I gather that you also have a lot of experience with this topic. What, in your opinion, are the most efficient measures?
I think, Lynn, that like Stephen, there are multiple measures that need to be taken, and each of the measures need to be tailored to the institution and the institution's priorities, because every institution is different. But I think that there are key areas, such as the recruitment and promotion process. Another area is the whole area of maternity leave and maternity returners. You mentioned that, Catalina, in your presentation. A really critical part of the academic career journey is in taking leave and then returning in, and the returning in is as important as the leave taking. And so that area needs a lot of attention. And I think there are a couple of other areas. One is a really demonstrable commitment from the very highest decision-making levels of the university or the institution to make this happen, and not to stand and to make it happen, not to accept that it cannot happen. And I think that's really, really key. And I'll give you a small example in my own institution. So, as I said, we're a new university. We have been founded just 3 years ago. A new president, new organization, everybody coming together for the first time. And EDI, equality, diversity, and inclusion, is a new thing for us, basically. We are by law required to have a gender-balanced governing body or senate. People have different names for this. And that needed to be put in place, and that required a little bit of work to enable that happen. We then needed to have, as we are required by law, to have a gender-balanced academic council, which was then bringing it closer into the university. And that was a really difficult process for us to tease through, because, as anybody knows, academic councils are composed of different groups of people and different interests, and we needed, at the end of the day, to have a 40-60 balance. And we achieved that. But that's not the real point. The real point is the effect that had on the institution then. After that, people began to expect, and the university executive began to expect, that every single committee, faculty group, working group of the university would be 40-60. They're not mandated by law, but because the norm is embedded in the process and we went through the process, it actually is happening on the ground. There was resistance, and I know we'll come to the point about resistances shortly, but that resistance has now died away. And women and men, it's unthinkable in my university now to have a working group that is solely composed of one gender or solely composed of one identity, either. So I think that's important. And I just might very briefly say, I think a second thing is important through all of this, and that is speaking with others in the sector, learning from other universities in the sector, and working with the policymakers in the sector to enable change to happen, because the policymakers can exert a very useful leverage on the sector to change expectations for higher education in this regard. So I'll stop there.
Thank you. It's encouraging to hear that the institutional mindset also changed really broadly after these interventions. So I want to turn to the next topic and ask my next question to you, Katalin. As we have talked about effective measures now, but I think you have showed very, very starkly in your presentation that there is also still a lot of work done. And I just want to emphasize that I'm not asking this question to Katalin as a representative of the EU 13 countries, because what we have also seen in her slides, for example, are facts like, for example, that the Netherlands is actually at the end of the statistic when it comes to female representation in academia. So this is by no means a EU 13 country, but I think this perspective is really really important. So what is your opinion? Which are the areas in which progress is still too slow? Where do you see we are facing most resistance, and why, I guess?
Well, I think, as already mentioned by Yvonne and others, so there is a need change of a mindset, and it depends on the country, generations, people. Yeah, I would say for EU 13 countries, trainings of unconscious bias are not much available, so it's not so much discussed. There is no, so far there have not been so much discussion about it, but I think there is a big step towards improving the situation with the fact that the European Council requests each institution applying for Horizon or European funding to get their gender equality plans. So now all institutions in Hungary and all over Europe, who hadn't got there, or it wasn't updated or wasn't really maybe best way processed, so they are now preparing their gender equality plans. And here I just would like to mention that also the Young Academy of Europe and the Academia Europaea Cardiff Hub with the Caliper project, it's a cost project, they also had an important exchange of knowledge between different stakeholders, members from different countries, and they discussed and they helped each other to set up these gender equality plans. So I think exchanging knowledge is extremely important, as also mentioned earlier by Yvonne, and then maybe together we can change a little bit the mindset, and societal changes are also necessary, and structural ones, as already mentioned, like the childcare facilities or their availability or the price. So if it's too expensive and you have 600 euros salary, then you can choose to stay at home for one more year or pay your salary for childcare facilities. So these are also these kind of issues and institutional measures. Yeah, I think at EU 13 countries, maybe these gender equality plans will bring some change, but for that we need to involve all stakeholders, again, as Yvonne mentioned, but I would say we need to involve those who are mostly affected, so also ask the workers, those who return from work, and with the Hungarian Young Academy we are advocating for a reintegration grant for especially dedicated for women. This can be achieved at the national level or at the institutional level, But again, I think there is funds who need to be located a little bit for this. So, commitment of the leadership of the funding agencies or maybe the institutions is very important, because without allocation of specific funds, this will also not work.
Can I quickly borrow this? So you, in your presentation, you had already mentioned childcare and the stark differences. I think also just the geographical diversity we have in Europe when it comes to how you can take maternity leave or paternity leave, how long that can be, how that is basically financed and subsidized by the state, etc. So we have already gone into the stark differences. I don't think we will reach to any conclusion on this topic today, other than this is clearly a very important topic. What do you think is the role that research assessment plays in promoting equality, diversity, and inclusion in academia, maybe specifically gender equality, if you want?
Well, as I just mentioned, as we have shown that there are even scientometric differences between, the number of citations or the number of papers published, it really fits into what has been discussed in the previous panel, that and what all this research reform assessment is about. So we need to change the mindset. We are looking for excellence, and also women who want to get the best fundings, they should have excellent output. But maybe there should be a consideration that I think those differences should be somehow taken into consideration. So one of the senior scientists I know, he always mentions that maybe a woman does not need 3 Nature papers. It's enough if she has 1. So that's showing excellence. Well, again, it's not the way how we are now sensing excellence, but I think that we really need it if we want to overcome these differences. And also one thing we mentioned in the pre-panel discussion was about teaching activities. So if you are in a university position, it's again something that varies a lot between different European countries and different universities, and your position at a university, how much you are teaching. And that's also something that should be taken into consideration.
Yeah. I think in the interest of time, I would go to my next question. Yvonne already mentioned the topic of resistance, and I'm assuming that almost everyone here in this room has had one or the other discussion in their life about the topic of equality, diversity, and inclusion, and has met some form of resistance when discussing this topic. One example, I want to talk about it on a slightly broader scale, though. And one example that I want to give you is that an example that has recently happened at several Dutch universities, where the universities actually wanted to conduct a survey on equality, diversity, and inclusion on several Dutch universities. And this survey was basically hijacked by, internet trolls that were sent to the website of the survey by sort of a Dutch Breitbart-like platform. And it had the effect that the survey had to be stopped. It had to be taken down because the data from that survey was essentially unusable. Another example, I think, is that right-wing political players are using the whole discussion around equality, diversity, and inclusion for their own purposes. They're politicizing it in a way that actually can make it into the mainstream. And I would like to ask actually all 3 of you, if we have time for a short answer from each, what do you think? How should we deal with this resistance in the first place? Should we even engage with it? Or should we just try to ignore it? Or in which ways can we most effectively address it? Stephen, can you start?
Well, I think the lesson from the poll is don't conduct these sorts of conversations or surveys on social media. It is a hellscape of nastiness. And so you won't get a constructive discourse, which you can get within the confines of the university, and depending on the nature of the forum. But the culture wars, as they're called in the United Kingdom, I don't know if the term has a European currency as well, is something that's increasingly growing. We do get government ministers kind of throwing brickbats at universities particularly on freedom of speech issues and on the sort of gender identity versus gender critical perspectives. There are some very fiery debates happening here, which are happening across society. There are important issues. Social norms are changing and shifting. This is a very live space, I would say. But it is important to be able to have those sorts of conversations. And universities, if they stand for anything, hopefully stand for free discourse and the ability to pull ideas apart. Ideally, of course, in a respectful manner so that one can have a constructive conversation.
Yvonne, what do you think? Yeah, I would completely agree with Stephen on that. I think, in fact, universities can't shy away from that conversation. And if it can't happen in universities, where can that conversation happen? In a place where ideas are subject to critical analysis. But I think that in this culture wars space, many people in our institutions who are, extremely bright and committed researchers and teachers in their own areas find themselves a little bit frightened by the culture wars and engaging in the culture wars, and I can understand why. And I think it's a responsibility for those of us that work in equality, diversity and inclusion to build capacity right through the university and in all our staff and our students to build a certain amount of self-reflection into their thinking and into their everyday actions and into their processes of interaction. So that when the culture wars come to the door from outside, the issues have already been aired inside the institution. So that when people are discuss issues related to right-wing views around, let's say, homophobia or anti-Semitism or any of those things that are so typical in all our universities, and we have them too, that it's about thinking not about you as an individual, but the impact that you can have on other people. And when you turn it around like that, and think of it in that way, the poison of the culture wars people who are trying to damage what you're doing actually goes away, because it's met with a confident level of self-reflection and awareness as to why we adopt the positions that we do. So I think we have a piece of work, a responsibility ourselves to carry out.
Katalin, can I ask you too for a short answer on this?
Yeah, very short one. I'm conscious of the time, and I also come from a university which had gender studies in Hungary, but that has been shut down recently. So so I fully agree with the other speakers. I don't want to comment.
Yeah. I have. Can someone tell me how we are doing on time? Since very badly. Well,
we are doing fine.
We have 3 minutes. Okay, then I'm actually going to skip one of the questions that I would have had otherwise, and I'm going to go straight to my closing questions. I would like to ask each of my panelists here to basically give the audience sort of a take-home message. Which processes should each one of these clearly powerful people in this room basically take to their home institutions to enact more equality, diversity, and inclusions? And please, a 1-minute answer would be appreciated. Let's start with you, Stephen.
I think go back to your rector magnificus, your vice chancellor, your provost, your president, whoever, and ask them that the next time they are writing the institution's strategy, that it incorporates strategic goals around equality, diversity, and inclusion that are led from the top.
And I would add to that, by saying that equality, diversity, and inclusion is about bringing social justice into academia to support excellence. Excellence cannot be achieved without social justice and inclusion. So keep in mind the question as your rector writes this statement. Keep in mind the question, is this activity or plan or measure or initiative furthering inclusion or reinforcing an unproblematized status quo? And in the answer to that question, you will find your pathway to developing your equity and inclusion plans.
Yes, and I would say that you need to collect data so that we see the problems, we identify the real problems, and we answer those. So we should be also aware that there are areas where men are underrepresented, for example, medicine or some areas. So we should really look at the data and then do all kind of measures in response to the issues that are really present.
Okay, thank you very much to all three of you. I hope we still have time for some questions from the audience. I think we deserve that, though. Right? And I see a couple of hands there. Where's our microphone? Yes, go ahead.
Petra Hoedorf from the University of Groningen in the Netherlands. I fully agree with Yvonne that it's the sitting generation that has to do the change. You don't fix leaks with water. And therefore, I would like to ask Stephen to tell us, how do you train the sitting generation to do the best selection and to be the best promotion committee that favors the goals? We have learned that training them on group dynamics is just as important as training them on bias.
Well, I think training is an important component of it, but I think the way to make sure that the training is attended to and has impact is to judge people on results. So it's no point saying, well, we've trained everybody on unconscious bias, job done. I think you want to be looking further downstream at the results of that training. So are you seeing those measures coming through when you're recruiting people, when you are allocating resources for developing early career research careers, for example, and promotion? It's often been said physics advances one funeral at a time. I hope that the same isn't true for equality, diversity, and inclusion, and I hope that many of my senior colleagues will respond to this. And my experience is that, they get it, okay? There is a little bit of resistance, but it's a tiny minority. And the vast majority of people, I think, do see that this is critically important for the success and the legitimacy of the research endeavor across Europe.
I'm terribly sorry, but we have to cut your session now.
Okay, don't forget the drink, though. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much for that really excellent discussion. I will just leap off Stephen's mention of Nature's special issue on racism published last week, which I encourage you to read. All right, we will move to our final session for today. This is on asking more from research. Scientific and scholarly research results are a public good to be benefited for society to benefit from. This will be led by your eminent president, Marja Makarow, who is a professor emerita of applied biology molecular biology at the University of Helsinki.
Thank you very much. So we move to another topic now. Research findings that are generated with public money is a public good. should benefit the society, and the society expects benefits to come out of their investment in fundamental research. Now, the Academia Europaea is very effective in delivery of benefits for society in the form of science advice, but now we are talking to another form of benefits for society, and this is innovation. So I have here two eminent panelists with me. I have Helga Novotny, a social scientist, and she is Professor Emerita of Science and Technology Studies at the ETH Zurich, and she is, of course, as everybody knows, former president of the European Research Council. And then I have here Shankar Balasubramanian. He is Professor of Chemistry at the Cambridge University, and he's an innovator who has been distinguished with several of the most prestigious groundbreaking innovation prizes in the world. So let's start with you, Shankar. You have made an innovation called Solexa DNA sequencing. Solexa has been commercialized as a Cambridge University spin-off and is today used all over the world for ultra-rapid and ultra-cheap DNA sequencing. So could you please tell us the journey, your journey from fundamental researcher to innovator, please?
Thanks, Marja. I'm not going to use slides. It's too complicated. So I'll talk about my journey with reference to the different stages from fundamental research to impact, if you will. So the research started actually, it's right at the beginning of my career. I was an untenured lecturer, as we used to be called in the UK, mid-90s. And relevant to this is a collaboration with a physical chemist called David Klenneman. So we were quite different linguistically, scientifically, and we were carrying out some very basic discovery research. We were not trying or pretending to do anything useful. I still have the original grant application we wrote at that time, and there was absolutely nothing useful implied in what we were trying to do. In fact, what we were trying to do was, so DNA, as most of you know, is composed of 4 different building blocks, GCTA, and we were using a relatively new observation technique, single molecule fluorescence detection, to watch a machine. These are the machines, the proteins that in nature replicate DNA. We were watching a machine build a strand of DNA, 1 building block at a time, by labeling the building blocks with a fluorescent color that you could observe. That was the observable. So this was basic research. Now, during the course of that, we had an idea. We had an idea as a sort of a spin-off of what we were really doing, which was just trying to understand this process. We saw a way to take what we were doing and actually read the code of DNA. And in essence, this idea was, if you take DNA, now the Human Genome Project was going on at the time, and 1 copy of a human genome is about 3 billion, 3 times 10 to the 9 of these building blocks. That's a lot of letters to decode. If you could break this DNA into fragments and put the fragments on a surface or a chip, we could really adopt the process that we were using anyway to read the bases, the letters of each of these in a massively parallel fashion. Now, we did some, so this was the ideas or the invention stage in the mid to late 1990s. Then we did some proof of concept experiments to show that it was not a completely ridiculous idea. Next phase is, I guess, what you might call innovation, reducing it to practice. Now, we were fairly interdisciplinary between us, but actually we needed much more. To really make this work, we needed molecular biology, we needed engineering, we needed software, we needed information science. So in the late 90s, there weren't many ways to build a project at scale that was interdisciplinary. So we ended up actually starting a spin-off company called Selexa purely as a mechanism to mobilize the resource, the capital, and the people to do the innovation part, which was reducing this to practice into a system. Now, we calculated that it may be possible to improve the way they were sequencing the first human genome in the Human Genome Project by perhaps 1,000-fold or 10,000-fold if we could reduce this to practice. So in this spin-off, it took a few years, but by 2006, there was a system, actually a commercial system, that was capable of reading 1 billion letters in a single experiment. Now, this was about a 10,000-fold enhancement on the state of the art when we started the project. Now, this was sufficiently successful that a company called Illumina acquired all of this technology and the company we started. And they applied the principles of engineering and optimization to improve it by another 1,000-fold. So today, actually, using this technology, you can sequence of the order of several trillion letters of DNA in a single experiment. And the cost per genome, roughly speaking, the Human Genome Project was of the order of billions. By 2009, 2010, it had reduced to about $1,000 US. Actually, today, I think the latest commercial price is approaching $200. So the improvement's about 10 million-fold in speed and cost. Now, why did we do it? We did it because the Human Genome Project was to generate a single reference of what the human genome looked like. But in order to really understand the genetic basis of who we are and what contributes to disease predispositions and actual disease, one needed to sequence at a population scale. So now I'll move on to the sort of impact part of this in the last minute. And this is really, so the ideas and sort of accidental discovery phase was about 5 years. The innovation part was about another 5 years. Then the early part of putting this technology and democratizing it was another 5 to 10 years. The impact part is really the third decade in the story. So today, some of you may be aware, there are population scale whole human genome sequencing projects going on in the world. In the UK, this is being done as part of the National Health Service. It's one of many countries integrating it into medical practice, both for discovery and also in some cases for making clinical decisions. So in the area of oncology, there are now many clinics around the world that will sequence the genome of the person and the tumor and use that as a basis for stratifying disease and making treatment decisions. The other areas are rare genetic disorders, pediatric disorders, which by their nature are very, very difficult or impossible to make diagnoses. Now at some of the most advanced clinics, mum, dad, and child are being sequenced, and a very, very good success rate in making a diagnosis that was previously not possible. The third area is infectious diseases, and here I'll simply highlight the fact that the virus that led to our pandemic was sequenced from a sort of complex human sample using high throughput sequencing. And of course, the tracking of the virus and emergent mutants of the virus has been done using rapid sequencing. Well over 1 million patients have had the virus sequenced from around the world. So we have a map of the epidemiology of this virus as it mutates. And such information, of course, is fed into the latest vaccines that some of us have probably received in the last few weeks. So I'll stop there, Marja.
Thank you very much. So you mentioned very important application areas. I mean, in medicine, of course, and personalized medicine is based on knowing enough of the patient sequence. And of course, the vaccine story is absolutely fantastic because the development of the vaccine, the corona vaccine, of course, relied on the precise knowledge of the sequence of the original strain and the new mutant strains. Are there totally different applicational areas? Could you think, or do you know, let's say, in agriculture, for instance?
Of course, every living thing, including plants, has a genome, usually DNA. In the case of some viruses, it's RNA. So I've been very human-centric in the examples I've chosen, but of course, understanding the genetic characteristics of every organism on the planet, I think, is a laudable endeavor. And of course, we now have organisms that are extinct, but we have their genomes, so all is not lost. So I think knowing the sequence and genomes across all species is fundamentally important. In agriculture, of course, knowing this, and of course genome editing is being applied now to agriculture to help engineer characteristics to give us better crop yields. This will be important as climate change is taking place, so temperature, water requirements, the changing landscape of insects and pests will necessitate means of improving agricultural crops.
Thank you. Before I turn to Helga, now the world does need new transformative technologies to mitigate these worldwide challenges. So how to make it happen? Fundamental researchers to come up with innovations in your case, and so it is with totally new innovations that there was no intention, right? So it emerges from this new knowledge that has been generated by basic research. So would you give us your view how to incentivize, or should the fundamental researchers be incentivized? And what about their organizations, universities? What are the incentives for universities to be interested?
Well, first point is, if you kill fundamental research, there will be no innovation. So having a very strong, well-funded base in fundamental research, people, infrastructure is essential. If you kill that, within a few years, your innovation is dead. So that needs to be strong. And in fact, basic research is so highly leveraged if it makes the journey. Well, when it makes the journey, it's a matter of time through to having an impact on society. Other points I would make is I think inventions and innovation are inevitable in universities and institutes that are adequately resourced, where individuals are given the freedom to be creative, which they naturally will be. So having an environment that supports that is key. Now, the pathway to innovation, for me, is a continuum. And, I'm at Trinity College in Cambridge, and one of our predecessors, Francis Bacon, wrote a lot about the continuum between basic curiosity-driven research and what some people call applied research. I don't draw a distinction. I think one leads naturally to the other. But in order for it to lead naturally to the other, you need to ensure that there are structures that encourage, support, and foster this continuum. Sometimes this means the avoidance of structures that kill it. And when the story I told is quite an old one, but The technology transfer office in our university at that time was one man and his secretary. And he did everything he could to enable things to happen. The corresponding structure today is 2 orders of magnitude bigger and more complex, well-intentioned, but inadvertently in structures like that, you can find roadblocks and friction. So I would say it's important to ensure that the pathway is as frictionless as possible, because ultimately the creator, whether it's a student or a postdoc or a professor, we all do what we do because we're obsessive about something. Allow them to continue to be obsessive and drive this vision along this journey. So I would say removing obstacles is a good start.
Thank you, Shankar. Now, we are talking a lot of technological innovations today. Social innovations are as important as technological innovations. So you, Helga, are an expert in this domain, and I would like you to perhaps, if possible, define for us what is understood with the social innovation, and then thereafter, how do they emerge? Can they emerge by serendipity, as we just heard, or is it more sort of top-down, looking at what is really needed, and then looking whether my research as social scientist could then mitigate some problems? So please, social innovations.
Let me take one step back.
Okay.
Shankar and I had the great pleasure to have already a discussion which was organized by the Cardiff Hub.
Yes, at my request.
And
yes.
there we acquired the habit of commentating on each other, and I don't want to lose this habit. So Shankar, and please audience, permit me to make a few comments on what you just have heard. I think it's a beautiful example of a success story. Now, there are many stories where you met obstacles that had to be overcome and so on, but your story is a wonderful success story. But what I want to highlight are 2 things that strike me very much. One is the temporal dimension. One is the temporal dimension, and you made it very clear how long it took. And interruptions could have happened for many reasons at various steps in this journey. And this is something that finance ministers have to be told. The second comment I want to make is that innovation very often is an incremental process. We speak about breakthroughs, and breakthrough has something, the dramatic moment, and then, the world changes completely. In reality, there are some breakthroughs. Nobody denies this, but the reality is it's an incremental process. And also, another aspect of innovation in general is very often it is the recombination of knowledge, of instruments that we already have. So it's not something, that falls from the sky and you start completely from new, because if it's completely new, you don't know how to, put it into contact and connect it with other things. And I think this you brought out so these are my comments. And as I said, we acquired this habit. You're invited to comment back on what I say. Now, social innovation. Philippe Aghion, whom you will hear later on, he puts innovation into a triangle. And the triangle exists of the state, the market, and civil society. And I think this also holds for social innovation. Social innovation is something that very much is seeping through civil society. It's very deeply involved in social innovations, because this is why you call it social innovation. The state has to do with it because very often you see social innovations that come through institutions. Institutional mechanisms are the innovative sites in a society for social innovation. And of course, you also need the market, be it to have the economic accessibility, access, social justice, etc., is something that the market has to guarantee, or you have to subsidize, or make it available. So, having said that, I think you want to have some examples, but the difference is striking. When you speak about technological innovations, we are thinking usually not of your wonderful journey. We are thinking of the latest technological gadget, something shiny that people rush to buy and they can show it to their friends. I have now the latest technological gadget. I'm ahead of everyone else. It is shiny and it has a property that every technology has. The impact is immediate. It works. And you find out from one moment to the other, does it work or does it not work? With social innovation, it's a much more fluid, much more, conceptually, socially drawn out process of linking ideas to what I call social practices. What do people actually do in relating to each other, in relating to institutions, in finding or inventing new mechanisms? And one historical example, which is a striking example, but it's a big innovation, if you want to call it that, of course, is going back to the 19th century, the age of industrialization and the enormous social fallout it had, also some positive, but also very negative fallouts. And the societal challenge in those days consisted in how can we keep social unrest at bay, which was very much in the minds of the elites of those days, but also how can we find a positive and constructive way, of keeping social order or reinventing a social order that makes most of what industrialization has to offer, namely efficiency, lower cost, economic growth, etc., etc. And the invention was the welfare state. And the welfare state was based on another social invention, namely insurance. Insurance is a social invention or innovation that everyone knows. We take it for granted, but it did not exist from ever. It was invented, and we can say, what were the pre-forms and the forms and the differentiation that followed. And so you started with the welfare state ensuring against work accidents, because otherwise you would lose the worker. You started later on with the pressure of workers, of course, to have some insurance against old age when you were no longer able to stand in the factory. Nevertheless, health insurance came and so on. Then the families were insured. So this is a social innovation in my view. But of course, it's not the only one. Also in the 19th century, we had this very interesting convergence of what we are facing now again and again. Every technological innovation has to be embedded into a social context. Be it an organization, and you open any business review or so on, the talk is what needs to change in terms of our organization so that we can appropriate and take the best out of what this technology has to offer. And of course, you never foresee completely the potential uses of it. So there is uncertainty built into it. And it offers opportunities, but you have to tear it out. And this is how the social organization has to become innovative to do it. And one way of how it is done, apart from, the organization business, that's their daily bread and butter, so to say, how to make most of it, but also is the law. The law is a social technology. It is surprisingly effective, although we have many opportunities to say, you know, law does not really work because people don't abide by it. But the law is an invention how to solve potential conflicts. The alternative, of course, is violence, physical violence. So with the help of the law, and the law is challenged now in those areas where we see the greatest impact of technological innovations. It's with regard to digitalization and artificial intelligence. How do we regulate? It is with regard to the exploration of space, or deep sea mining, or whatever you see in the news, and you know, these tremendous achievements of being able to get us there. But this raises questions, for instance, of ownership. Ownership is again a legal concept that goes back, you know, thousands of years. And yet it has to be redefined in the context in which we live today. How can we use the technologies, spatial exploration? I mean, the universe now is open thanks to the James Webb telescope. You know, it's inviting, the door is open. What are we going to do there, and how? And in order to avoid not only geopolitical conflict, I mean, it really goes through all layers of society. Where are the firms that will bring the minerals that, you know, may come one day? Who owns it? How shall it be distributed, etc.? So all these are legal innovations. Then, of course, in the 19th century, you had the hygienic measures that were absolutely crucial to make the most of the beginnings of vaccination, a public health system, you know, where the babies had to be brought to the doctor to weigh them, you know, in order to see what progress you could make, etc., to improve public health. So these are all examples. But then there's also one domain that is very innovative with social innovation, and this is finance. The amount of financial social innovations is mind-staggering, and you really need an expert to tell you, you know, what are the latest social innovations in regard with the stock market and how you can trade and what you can do with new financial instruments that are being invented while we speak. Yeah, and you know, it's a global phenomenon. It has a huge impact on us. So what I want to say is social innovations, they are not these shiny things that you can patent, but some of them find their way into laws, into governance, but they continuously have to be, you know, monitored. What does it work? You have this incremental process of social innovation that continues. But the real challenge is, how can we bring together in a better way the technological opportunities that are there with the social organization on the business side, but also with regard to a hospital, for instance. Yeah, you have a new fantastic diagnostic instrument, but you have to reorganize your hospital. And you have some expertise, which is always attached to people in a hospital, that will disappear. It's no longer necessary. But you will need other kinds of expertise, and you have to train the people to come with this expertise. So all this is an ongoing process, but much of it is incremental.
Thank you for these wonderful interventions, both of you. So in the interest of time, I open the discussion to the floor. So would there be comments, questions from the audience, please? Come on. Over there, please, could you bring the microscope to Sven-Erik?
It's a question to Helga. I was very intrigued by your presentation here. I'm a literary researcher, and I have done or finished together with lots of colleagues a big project on literary realism in Europe in the 19th century and its wider implications outside of Europe, also in other languages and so on. And one of the things about the 19th century is precisely these dealing with discussion of imaginations of the social innovations coming out of urbanization, industrialization in Europe, its impact on families and so on. And many of the discussions are not about the emergence of social interventions, but the impact it has on existing social structures, namely the changes of the social structures, in particularly the family structure and so on. So you mainly talked about new social kind of innovative effects and processes and so on, but the revision of existing social innovations or factors that were innovations in an earlier period are equally important. Have you been dealing with text or materials from literature, from philosophy or whatever? And are you also considering these kind of revision and not only the innovation?
Well, I can only reply with Schumpeter's creative destruction. Schumpeter was, at his time, one of the very few economists who was interested in the phenomenon of innovation. And he was interested also in the figure of the entrepreneur. And for him, it was very clear innovation was creative destruction. You had, the new was coming out, but there were old structures. But of course, you can pose the question now to everyone who is, arguing we need more innovation. Are we now, differently from previous generations, in a position where we can see a little bit further what are some of the unintended consequences of the innovations that we welcome with open arms? Yeah, and just one recent example is plastic. Plastic was great when it changed the life of women in Africa in a dramatic way, and we all welcomed plastic, and now we have microplastic, in the ocean, in the soil, in our lungs, in the air, etc. Now, I'm not saying, it was foreseeable then, but maybe we should make a greater effort trying to foresee some of the unintended consequences of the social innovation. What might it cause? Who might be most affected? What is good? What is it we want to prevent? So this is just a thought I want to leave with you.
May I make a comment? Also on what you said earlier, Helga, about the social impact and context for innovations, technological and otherwise. And certainly, I was educated in the UK system, and very early on in life, you have to decide whether you're going to be a science, maths person or a humanities person. You have to make a choice. It's very hard to do both. And what I find, 25 years of teaching undergraduate scientists, postgraduates as well, is most of them struggle to see the social context of science, of what they do. And that's because their exposure to the way of thinking that comes more naturally in humanities and social sciences has been lost. Well, it hasn't been developed as part of their education. So, one of the things we've been discussing quite a lot in our department is whether to bring some of that back at a later stage. And actually, if you go all the way to an innovation that becomes commercialized, it isn't until the marketing people enter the picture that societal things or ethics lawyers, very, very late stage, not early on. So I think, part of what we need to examine is this very early stratification of education.
I agree with that, yeah. And, this is a speculative idea I have, but looking back at history, if you look at the period of the Enlightenment, yes, again, if you want to call it a social invention of the Enlightenment, was a new world view. And part of the world view consisted in a very radical change in how people saw the future. Because for the largest part of human history, humanity was convinced the future had already been settled. By the gods, by the higher powers, by God, it was predetermined. And it was only at that period in human history, with science very much the driving force, that for the first time, people started to see the future as an open horizon. There was something ahead that was not predetermined, that could go in many, I mean, it's evolution in the 19th century. But the idea was already there, the worldview changed. But it was also the time where the idea came up, well, you know, we can do something with society. We can create new institutions, voting, insurance, you know, economics, etc. Ways of trying to shape society. And the constraints were nature. And maybe now this is a complete reversal where we have CRISPR, you know, we edit genes, we have brain organoids, we have all kinds of things. We have, you know, we take samples from Mars, etc., etc. And now we face the problem. How can we actually shape our society? And the constraints come from inventing new institutions and new forms of governance that we need in order to take in these new technological opportunities that we have. And we have to come to live up to the challenge.
Right, thank you. Carl Heldin.
So I was very glad to hear Shankar mentioning the importance of basic science for innovation. And as you pointed out, strong basic research is really essential in order to have successful innovation. And I could not agree more. There are so many examples where curiosity-driven research has led to breakthroughs which can be developed in various ways, sometimes in unexpected areas. And it would be wrong, I think, to de-emphasize basic research, because I think that there are additional breakthroughs around the corner for those who do research of that kind. But there is an alarming trend I see, where many of those who provide money for research, politicians and those who are in other positions to make decisions, to focus on applied research and de-emphasize basic research. So how can we convince politicians that basic research is really important and needs to be continually supported?
Happy to have the first go at that. I think it's an excellent question, and I mean, there's a paradox that we have to solve here. You know, I met a former Minister for Science, not recent, quite a long time ago, exactly to address this point. And everything was going well. My aim was to convince this person about what Helga spoke about, the timescales for things to potentially turn into something beautiful at the end. Of course, there's a high failure rate as well that must be tolerated. And I thought the conversation was going very well until in the last 2 minutes, he said to me, now, in the run-up to next year's general election. And it just sort of killed it there and then. So therein lies the problem. Policymakers think on a time scale that's incompatible with this journey. The journey, how do we convince them? I've certainly, for my part, tried to emphasize that you need 20 to 30 years if you're lucky. And I think, you know, my story, we had a lot of luck, we had a lot of failures, and it still took a lot of time, but I thought it was relatively fast. some things take 50 years, some things take a century. That's not a reason to stop knowledge generation and discovery. So I think it's difficult with policymakers, very difficult, but we can only give them examples where there has been success at the end and be realistic about the time it took.
Maybe we have to come up also with new ways of speaking about it. And something like a mortgage on the future would be perhaps something that a minister can understand. We take a mortgage on the house and we have 20 years or more, and the rates are calculated. It's perfectly clear. So why not do this for basic research?
So that works, but the issue is usually misalignment. The minister's not around to be in the house when it's paid off.
We have to work on that. Yeah, mortgage on
I should stop going down that direction.
Thank you. There's a question over there, please.
Yes.
Please stand up.
Anja Böckmann from the CNRS in Lyon. I wanted to ask, we have these tools, and you have mentioned some of them, like innovation offices and universities and so on, to accelerate innovation in research. But what is about acceleration in social innovation? I mean, what are the tools besides politics? Or, I mean, how can we also contribute to that without being reliable on politics? And we've seen in the previous session that there's a huge need, for example, for innovation in equality.
Well, I think, social innovation, it's difficult to accelerate because social innovations, you cannot plan them. You can only create conditions under which the likelihood for them to become realized are better. So it's a question of probabilities and creating an environment where you rely also on curiosity, seeing an opportunity. With regard to diversity, I mean the topic of the previous, I mean to make people realize there's an opportunity there. It's not just for the sake of it. Although you can argue moral justice, etc., but you can also present it as a way, you have an opportunity there and seize the opportunity, and then perhaps you can speed it up. But there's no magic bullet where you can say, okay, now we speed up, because these processes take time. You have contingencies everywhere. You have uncertainty whether you will succeed. Failure is always a possibility. You have to start again, just like doing science.
Yeah, I would say exactly the same applies to science and technology. I think what you need is support, full stop, enablement, encouragement, and patience. And ironically, in sort of my activities on the more entrepreneurial side, I've come across investors who are happy to wait 10 to 15 years on their investment, because they realize that if you want to build the next Google or Microsoft, it's not going to happen in 5 years or 6 years. It's going to be 10 to 20 years. So when shrewd investors are willing to be patient, to allow something beautiful to grow, institutions, funding bodies, ministers, why can't they? All of them, all of the above.
Yeah. So we take the last two quick questions. The lady over there, please.
Yes, thank you. Alexandra Patura from the Netherlands Erasmus MC again. I was very happy that I heard now the word failure and also waiting time, because I think that what is also an issue is that we are over-promising. So the promises for what could be benefited by society sometimes are too grand, and then they fail, and then obviously the public is losing trust in our research. So one of the things that I think is really important in science communication is to also make room for the failure when we communicate about science. And what I mean by that is if we, when we promised recreating human brain in computer in 10 years, and this is what was fed to the public, and then we don't keep that promise, then it really reflects poorly on the whole neuroscience research. So one of the things that I think is really important to say, like, look, sometimes some of the research might not be beneficial. And I think that this clarity is really something, this transparency of saying, this is also what's driving then the problem with publication bias, that we only publish positive results, right? And the negative results are not published. So this drive of like everything has to be the most efficient, the most beneficent. And I wonder whether this is something that could be implemented and how you want to address it, that it has to be beneficial.
I think that this comment doesn't perhaps need answers because it's quite self-evident. I mean, what you talked about, high gain, high risk, this is the concept. Now, the very last question over there, and very quickly, please.
Thank you very much. Social innovation and the social technological innovation are big concepts. What I want to say today is to give an example. Can all the experts from all over the world participating in the conference today create a big communication community group for everyone, in the case of small communication with each other, the possibility of seeking cooperation, how to make different languages and different people communicate more efficiently, not just one-to-one communication, but a social group communication, which is beneficial for everyone to understand each other. Yeah. For example, I want to know you. How can I accessibility to communicate with you? If we can solve every problem that is conducive to the provision of convenient services that we need to face at the moment, will new concepts of social innovation emerging? Concept innovation, technological innovation, and management innovation shall all be fundamental needs for the convenience of
I'm sorry
our
to
lives.
break you. I'm sorry to interrupt you. I did not get the essence of your question, and I propose that we continue the discussion over coffee because our time is now out. I'm terribly sorry that I had to rudely interrupt you. So please take up your question again during the coffee pause. It is now my pleasure to thank you for a fantastic discussion.
Thank you.
And so we break for coffee, 30 minutes for coffee, and please be back at 5.